From Radio London Films comes a story of a boy who turned his reality into fantasy. The fireworks are about to begin. Things that hang from trees.
We all a little weird around here.
Oh, yeah. Huh. Okay. Hey, hold this. Who fucking way? Where's your firecracker buddy now? Yeah, having fun, Junior? Yeah, we are. We having fun now. Uh-oh. Tree's on fire. We've started a fire.
You goddamn crazy? Tree's on fire.
To weigh out and rough mix all the chemicals from my fairy fountain composition, I've got my little digital scale. I'll turn it on with the measuring cup or the weighing cup on it. I've got a little test weight which weighs 5.7 grams just to check the scale, and that is weighing 5.7 grams. All of my chemicals are fine enough to pass a 40 mesh screen. If they weren't, as in with my granular potassium nitrate, I mill it a little bit in a rocket blender, single serving blender. So I'll weigh out each of my chemicals individually into the cup, combine them in a mixing tub and shake them. I've got dedicated scoops in each of the tubs of my chemicals so I don't cross-contaminate any of the chemicals one with the other. So I will weigh out 50 grams of potassium nitrate, 50.6 grams, and I'll do this with each of the chemicals, weighing them individually and putting them in the mixing tub, and then I'll weigh the whole combined composition to make sure it weighs what I wanted it to weigh. I am not going to weigh the spherical titanium in right now. I'll save that for the very end. I don't put titanium through my fine mixing screens. There is 50.8 grams. And there's 50.6 grams of potassium nitrate. I'll do that with each of my individual chemicals and put them in the mixing tub. And the last chemical to be added, since I'm adding the titanium later, last chemical to be added is 3.45 grams of calcium carbonate. Sometimes when weighing small quantities, I like to take the cup off the scale, add the chemical to the cup and put it back on. The scales can weigh a little odd if you add a small quantity slowly. So 3.45 grams of that. There's 4 grams. There's 3.4 plus a little bit. so that's all of my chemicals except the titanium. I give that a quick rough shake, and then I'll be screen mixing this in a minute. Now I want to double check my complete composition weight. I'm going to tear the scale with that tub on there. Having the cup under that tub prevents the recess on the bottom of this larger cup from interfering with the scale. This should weigh 115 grams less the titanium weight, which is 1.15, so a little less than 114 grams. Thereabouts. And that weighs exactly 114 grams, so that's perfect. I've not omitted any chemical, I've not weighed any individual chemical incorrectly. And that's ready to screen mix in the next step. The best way to mix a composition is through a screen. This is a 40 mesh screen on a piece of craft paper. I have shaken my composition once to roughly mix it. I'd normally be doing this outdoors where the dust can dissipate, but I'll do it indoors for taping purposes. Just put my cup on the 40 mesh screen and with gloved hands rub it to the screen. I'll do this 3 times with a shake in the tub after each time. Final shake in the tub will give it a good final mixing. The screen breaks up any clumps that were left in the chemicals and also really intimately mixes the chemicals together in the composition. After the final shake in the tub, I've got to remember to add my titanium to the mix. I do not put titanium through my good sifting screen, so it'll clog up the pores and possibly contaminate future chemicals that I want to go into the ball mill. So I add the titanium at the very end. So I'll screen that composition and shake it 2 more times and then add the titanium to it. And this composition screened and shaken 3 times will now get 1.15 grams of the titanium shaken into it. It's not a whole lot of the time. We don't want a lot of titanium sparks in these fountains. That's 0.8 grams, 0.9 grams, 1.1 grams, and I'll put in just a little bit more. So we'll call that 1.15 grams. I'll put that in there and shake that into the composition dry, and then I'll dampen the composition, which will further integrate the titanium into the composition. I now want to dampen the composition. I've got the titanium mixed in there. I want to dampen the composition with water spritzed in until it gets to a stick-together brown sugar consistency. Then I will granulate it onto a paper-lined drying screen through a 20 or 24 mesh screen and allow it to dry. I'll keep track of how much water I add to this. Just out of curiosity, I'll spritz in a little and shake it. These little atomizing spray bottles are great for rolling stars or for adding water gradually to a composition like this so it doesn't get over wetted. And now and then I'll just wipe the excess off the walls of the tub and work it in, and I'll do that until it gets to a stick-together brown sugar consistency. And this is getting close to the consistency I want. The dextrin in this mix will allow this to granulate into relatively hard little granules, which will still consolidate nicely when it's hand rammed. And that granulated composition will ram much more nicely than if it hadn't been granulated. If it's not granulated, ramming is a very dusty, messy process, and when you stick the rammer into the tube, a lot of the dusty, fine composition will floof right out of the tube and make a heck of a mess. Yeah, this is getting to a nice dry, or nice damp brown sugar consistency, and I've put about 20 grams in there right now, so 20 grams out of a 115 gram batch is about 20%. So I've added about 20% water to that, maybe just a little bit less. And now I'll just granulate that through the 24 mesh kitchen colander onto the drying screen. Spread out on a paper lined tray or drying screen, put out into the sun if it's not too windy where it can blow away. It'll dry in a few hours. I've got instructions for a nice drying chamber on the Fireworking website, and if I put this thin layer composition in the drying chamber for an hour or two, it'll be completely dry and ready to use. And this dampening and granulating process has really integrated the titanium into the composition very nicely. And that's ready to dry. And once it's dry, we'll be ready to ram some fountains. One nice trick for drying compositions is to spread it out with one of these coarse tooth combs into a fine broken up layer, which will then dry very nicely and quickly. Once the propellant composition has dried, it dries in chunks like this, which can be a little bit tough to scoop, work through a funnel into a tube, and ram. So I like to put the composition through the same screen that I used to granulate it. Real quickly. Normally I would once again be doing this outside so the dust wouldn't be a problem, but for filming I do it in here. Well, I just put it through gently. Try not to break up the granules too much, but put it through the screen gently and put it in a tub and then seal it. And then that is ready to scoop and use. That will scoop and flow through a funnel and into a tube very nicely for ramming in a fairy fountain. That'll flow very nicely, but it's not very dusty. To ram a fountain now, I've got a nice mallet. I like my rawhide mallet. Got a solid pounding post, a flat solid block to ram on, a 1/2 inch ID by 5 inch long paper tube. I've got some clay. This is Hawthorne Bonfire clay. You could use bentonite clay. I've got my fairy fountain composition. I'm going to scoop some of that out to work out of and close up the rest of it for safety purposes. I've got a 1/2 teaspoon measuring spoon, and I've got rammers with which to ram the clay and the fountain mix. This is a rammer from a 1/2 inch rocket tooling set. This is a solid rammer. You can use a 1/2 inch aluminum piece of rod. For long, if I'm making a really long fountain, I've got a 1/2 inch oak wood dowel I can use for the ramming. So to start, I just put a piece of masking tape over the bottom of the tube. One thing I didn't mention, I've got a little plastic funnel. I'll put just a flat 1/2 teaspoonful of clay into the tube, and I will ram that with about 8 good solid whacks of the mallet. When I'm ramming composition, especially composition that has metal in it, it's not a bad idea to wear a leather glove especially on the left hand that'll be holding the tube. I've got eye protection on and cotton clothing. Now I'll start introducing 1/2 teaspoon at a time of the fountain composition and ramming it the same way. I do keep a little rubber O-ring on my rammers to keep any dust to a minimum. I'm ramming with medium wax, paying attention I'm not bulging the tube too much at all. If I hit the rammer too hard, it'll burst the tube. If I don't ram hard enough, the composition won't get very solidly compacted. So there's sort of a feel one gains for this kind of process. And I'll keep doing that until the tube is full to within 1/2 inch of its end. I'm now to within about 1 inch of the end of the tube. I can probably put one more increment in here using the funnel. Yeah. And that fills the tube within about 3/4. One way I can introduce the last increment is just to plunge the top of the fountain down in the composition. That fills it all the way, and then carefully I can ram that last increment. And that has filled the tube to within about 1/4 or 3/8 of the end of the tube with nice solid composition. I'll put the rest of my comp away and have it out of the way and safe before I proceed. To finish the fairy fountain then for firing, I just cut a piece of visco fuse. I like to cut all fuse with razor anvil cutters. Just J-hook that fuse so it fits right down in the mouth of that nicely. And a simple way of finishing the fountain is to just put a wrap of masking tape around the mouth. Put the fuse down in there and crimp the masking tape around the fuse. Putting a string tie around the masking tape will secure that fuse in there really well and keep the masking tape from opening up. A little more traditional way of finishing a fountain or any other device is to use either some gum tape or traditionally a little bit of craft paper, a strip of craft paper, enough to go around the fountain twice. It's called a paper nosing. I'll dampen the edge of that nosing, stick it. If I was using just craft paper, I would use a strip of Elmer's glue on there. Paper nosings don't deteriorate with time like masking tape can, and it's also a very positive, consistent, reliable way of fusing a device like this. So that paper is now adhered to the top of the tube very nicely. Stick the fuse down in there so it's in contact with the composition. Crimp the tube around there, and then I will put a clove hitch knot of string, thin string, around the nosing to secure it nicely. Secure it with an overhand knot. Clip off the excess string, and then that fuse is very nice and secured in there, and that's a very traditional, positive way to fuse a device like this. That's ready to tape onto a support and fire, or stick in the ground and fire. But these fairy fountains, they like to drop their sparks for a long time, so it's much better to mount this high on a support stick or hanging upside down high from a support so the sparks can drop a long time.